So, well, hello everyone. We'll just assume that this works. How are you, Denis?
Very
You
good. How are
awake?
you, Eugene? Good morning.
I'm okay. Good morning to you. Good morning to everyone. Actually, afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to everyone who decided to join us. So, without further ado, I want to introduce my friend and colleague, Principal Flute of LA Philharmonic, Denis Bouriakov.
Thank you. Hello. And I would like to introduce my friend, Principal Oboe of San Francisco Symphony, Eugene Izotov.
Thank you. So we're friends, I guess. Is that the point that we just made?
Oh,
We have to
oh,
be
we are
friends now
friends on
because now it's
Facebook, so
official.
we are
It's
friends.
officially we are friends. That's right. We're friends on Facebook. So I guess we made it this far. Well, I've I've missed you because you've been in Korea for the past several months, and you're back. I still haven't seen you. You live very close. LA is not that far from here, but of course we're not traveling much because of this really difficult situation. So nice to see you in
Nice to
your.
see you too.
Except you look better than me because you must have better equipment. Is that why? You must have better camera.
I'm not sure. Are you using your inbuilt one or?
I'm using my wonderful built-in camera into this 7-year laptop. You have the latest. What camera are you?
GH5 Lumix. That's um, oh, it froze for a second, so I panicked. Okay, I'm using Panasonic
I
Lumix
can see you.
GH5, which is a DSLR mirrorless. Yeah. So,
I I'm very happy to see you and to have this chance to talk with you about some of the things that we sort of discussed in general, but since we have an audience, except I'm having trouble connecting to the feed of people chiming in, but I'll do this later. So basically, I wanted to talk with you about some issues that we usually discuss when it's like 3 in the morning and we're somewhere in Sapporo after two rehearsals and a concert and a night out with Gergiev or something. And we just discuss these things. We talk about wind playing, we talk about orchestras and styles. And I thought we would just get organized and discuss, for example, um, it's I know the flute, of course, is a such a refined, beautiful instrument. We all know this. I've sat next to flutists my whole life. Sort of, I see flutists and second oboe basically more per day in my normal life than anybody else in my life, including my family. So flute is a wonderful instrument. The oboe is a wonderful instrument, but we're sort of young instruments compared to, say, string instruments, violin. We don't have the traditions that are just as long, and we haven't. Of course, we evolve and we see the evolution of some of these traditions. So, I think a really good thing is happening now in both the flute world and the oboe world, which is I think that we're finally getting to the point where we're getting outside of this locked mentality of camps, like they do this over here, we do that over there, this is our style, this is their style, and we're getting to the concept of international playing. In other words, what, in your opinion, are the attributes of international playing on, let's just stick to flute and the oboe these days in the year 2020?
well, yeah, I think it's a topic we talked a lot about. We discussed both in, as you described, in those situations, and then when we exchanged our studio classes, we find we have similar things to say about this. And it is true. Back in the day, there was so much difference between French school of flute playing, American school of flute playing, German school of flute playing, Italian school of flute playing, for instance. For me, of course, it's easier to talk about the flute, but with the oboe, it was and still is, and I think in a way even bigger difference in styles because you had Tubadu, I'm sorry, forgive my pronunciation, who moved to USA, and he started a completely
Depardieu,
new
that's different. But we'll stick with
Yeah,
Tabito, although we can talk about Gerard. He's fabulous. I've met him. Russian citizen, like you, or like me,
Gerard Depardieu.
formerly. Yeah, seriously. I'm sorry, just a little side note, but yes,
Yes.
he's actually a Russian citizen. But
Yeah.
go on, back to Tabito and other
Tabito,
subjects.
excuse me. Yeah. So the at some point the difference between schools was really huge. For instance, talking about flute, when my teacher was studying, he said the silver flute was not accepted in England. They were playing the wooden flute only at the Royal Academy and Royal College, but only the Guildhall School of Music was accepting that silver flute is coming, and it's better mostly for romantic repertoire and things like that. I mean, let's not touch the Baroque right
No.
now.
We're not touching Baroques. We all want to be friends at the end of this conversation.
That's right. But so he said he went to Guildhall School of Music and Drama because they were playing silver flutes there. Jeffrey Gilbert was teaching, and he, Marcel Moïse was the big star, the first big name who was playing the silver flute. And still, the difference between schools remained, even all the way till 1990s. I'd say it was huge. When I was a kid, we had some players occasionally come to Moscow and give master classes, and it was striking how different they sounded, coming from America, from France, from Germany. So, as you said, now I think the borders are sort of slowly getting erased in that sense, because I think partially because of the technology, of course. Now you have recordings available with 2 clicks, and we have sort of opposite problem. Now people don't want to spend the time listening. Before, we didn't have the recordings, we had to copy them with tapes from our teachers and all that. But at the same time, now there's so much information, and you have master classes and everything online. You can watch, you can travel and play to people, and you hear the recordings, you hear the orchestra recordings, and you hear different styles of playing. And I think we sort of, because of that, people absorb so much from other schools, and in the end it's sort of becoming not about the school anymore, but about the musician. I mean, it always was, of course, but back in the day, it had to be a superstar level player who would rise above the school in a way. When musicianship is so great, you don't pay attention anymore, and there's no argument if this player is from German tradition or French. But I think now it's sort of getting to the masses in a way. Even you see students who are playing and sounding French over here, and they sound German in France. I've had many French students play for me in master classes, and it was very interesting how much it's changed, the tone and everything. So I think it's a great thing that everything is becoming very international, and
Yeah,
I think
we
Guildhall
sort
is
of
the same.
we sort of witnessed that last summer, wouldn't you say, during the Tchaikovsky International Competition,
Absolutely.
which is what this is all about. Is that when we had 2 years ago that night with Valery Gergiev in his room, and basically boiled down to, what are we, chopped liver, basically, on behalf of wind players of the world. Like, why don't we, participate in Tchaikovsky competition? And he said, I want a superstar winner.
Yes.
I want to look for superstar players. And it was really nice because we, other than spending 2 weeks in beautiful St. Petersburg, we saw friends and colleagues from absolutely very, very different styles of playing. And somehow during the conversations, and well, we didn't have a discussion, it was just straight voting, but during our general discussion of state of things, not once did anybody say, well, we can't vote for this or we can't vote for that because, or I hate this style or I don't like this style, because it sort of didn't matter, because I felt that we all were after after musical things, after evocative things, after expressive things, and things that have to do with brilliant performance, technique, and all this other virtuosity, all these other things that I think we understand as musicians. And of course, it's interesting when I'm just curious. This is a completely general, completely general question, which is maybe impossible to answer. But when would you say this sort of feeling of necessity to evolve to a more international level for flute players? When did this awareness begin? I don't mean like exact day, but like would you say 1 year ago, 10 years ago? Like when did this start to happen?
I think it's hard to, of course, pinpoint the moment, but
exact time of day, month.
I think past 20, 30 years more than ever, and past 10 years especially. I mean, it's sort of progressing in a way, wouldn't you say? Because I think partially it's the players getting jobs in orchestras in other countries. So French players are getting jobs in German orchestras, French players and German players get jobs here, American players get jobs there. So I think this exchange is sort of helping to spread that idea, because you find that actually it's not impossible. Also, we both coached in PMF and Verbier and festivals like that, where you have people coming from all traditions. The wind section is really a mixture of all styles possible. You have people coming from Russia who only studied there. You have wind players from America. You have players from Switzerland, all coming from different traditions, playing German clarinet, French clarinet as a section together. So, of course, it was the first time I was very curious how it's gonna. When I came there as a student, too, I was thinking, how is this gonna work? But
that's when I met you.
Yes, that's right, 2006. But then you realize that actually it can work. And of course, there are challenges. I'm not saying it's always perfect, but I don't think that's, for me, that was the realization point. PMF and Verbier, which I attended both as a student, I was like realizing, okay, this is really not all about school. It's about making music together. And
what would you say are the challenges when people from different styles have to make music together? And I mean, you can speak about festivals or beyond in a professional world. What would you think are the challenges as far as mixing wind traditions?
Well, the challenges, I think, are different depending also on the level. I mean, the challenges we faced in Verbier were, a French bassoonist was playing very delicately principal part, and a girl who trained in Germany played second bassoon with much bigger sound, and it was hard to balance. These are like very small technical issues which are not really challenges, once you get to the next step in your development, I think. So these are the obvious ones, but stylistically, I think nobody has. I mean, all the great musicians I admire, they all have a flexible mindset. It's not fixed, because I think once you decide that there's only.
Can you please repeat what you just said, because I think that's so important and that's so completely crucial for everyone to understand. Can you repeat that?
Yes, I think it's extremely important to have a flexible mindset for a musician, because once you set in a way saying there's only one way to play, this is right, everything else is wrong, I mean, it's time to die. It's too boring.
So, oh my God. So I mean, you really are Russian. It's like, it's been 15 minutes in this interview. We're only talking about death. We're talking about death already. But I want to point out that, so yes, of course, that's one, to avoid death is one strong reason. Froza, are you back? Okay, you're back.
Yes.
But the other reason is, so tell me, let's just do math. How many flutists, if you're trying to win a job in an orchestra, symphony orchestra, opera orchestra, how many flutists are on the committee judging you?
Oh, that's a very good point you brought, I remember, in the studio class. Yes, it would be anywhere between 1 and maximum 3.
Maximum 3.
And that's only if nobody takes the audition for the job.
If nobody wants the job, because sometimes somebody from the section wants the job, so then it's down to 2. It's the same math on oboe.
Actually, audition for the Met had no flute players on the panel, not single one.
Wow. So that's why you won. No. Uh, so um, so let's just continue with this math. So basically, you can say, you see, the thing is, I know about your little dirty secrets of flutist. I know about the low D. I know about the noisy tone and this and that. I know the things, some of the things, not all the things certainly, but I know the things that are generally speaking challenging on your instrument. And you probably know about our flat G and C sharp and
Yes.
read this and style that. So you know, but the thing is, when you play for people who do not play your instrument, it's not that they don't care about your problems, which of course in most cases they don't. You know, they don't know. But when you do something really well, for example, when you're playing, I don't know, the mind just, I don't know which excerpt to pick. For example, when you're playing, I don't know, Brahms 2, second oboe, second movement. What am I talking about? Third movement, first oboe solo. So it starts on the B, which is a really thin note in the oboe. When an oboist is able to have a really big, broad, juicy sound, we, in our oboe community, we appreciate that because we know how difficult it is to do that. The thing is, when you do something difficult, specifically challenging on your instrument, well, people who don't play your instrument don't know that you just did something really difficult, instrumentally speaking. So they might not necessarily give you credit for that because life is not a flute convention or an oboe convention, and thank God for that. Can you imagine? Like flute fair. Mike Parloff, you know, principal flute of the Met, used to say flute fair like this, which somehow goes in character. Flute fair, or International Double Reed Society, which is a wonderful organization, but you know you're surrounded by oboists and bassoonists who really understand reed challenging. So when you're auditioning for an orchestra, you're being judged by musicians. Musicians don't want somebody who have who have the any given, you know, the clarity in the low D or the pitch in the G. They want somebody who will give you the most interesting story, who will impress you with musical things because these are the things they understand. And that brings us back to the whole question of international level. I think in the oboe, I won't speak on behalf of anybody really. I'm just speaking for me. But I think I just by my talking to students and colleagues just all over the world really, I think this general sense of awareness is starting to happen on the oboe because this has nothing to do with ignoring the traditions that we're based on. I think we are very, very proud of our traditions and we're very lucky in this country. Of course, Tabito, the godfather, started the tradition, then they had the disciples and so forth. And in Europe, they have wonderful traditions as well. And it's sort of like we were completely separated by the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean and kind of coexisted in our little worlds and were equally marveled and enamored by the audiences there or here. And because of so many reasons, because people travel more, they study in other places, like you said, they record more, people listen more. And also, equally important, people are starting to win jobs in this orchestra or in another country. And the concept of being true to tradition is, in my opinion, is not really the ultimate goal of music because I don't think our job is to be purists. I think our job is to keep the tradition if you so desire. But the expression I've been using with students is don't replace, add. There are wonderful things to be learned from other traditions. And
Yes.
within the umbrella of American oboe playing, not everybody sounds the same. Hardly,
Of
actually.
course.
The greatest people that I've admired, you know, they're very, very different. I'm not even talking about their artistic, side. I'm just talking about their sound, their instrumental, their how they produce and support the tone. So they're wonderful things to be learned within one tradition. So um, that's sort of 20th century talk. I think that by now, I would love it if any of my students went somewhere from a different country, and somebody would say, "What do you think of this player?" And they'll say, "Well, uh, maybe this is not the sound or the style that we're used to or we prefer even, but this person is a really terrific musician." So I think that's really great. And by the way, that seems to impress most committees anyway, and that seems
Absolutely.
to and that seems to work. That's actually one of the things that I mean, as much or as little as I know about the flute, I remember what you sounded like at Verbier. You were a star. You were absolutely a star right from the beginning, and um, it would not occur to me to think which flute sound you may have had at the time. And of course, you're the player, the artist now, in every possible way superior to what you were in Verbier, and hopefully me too. You know, but the reason why you represent so many wonderful things is not because you kept true to that tradition. You know, like the wonderful song "Fiddler on the Roof" tradition. So that works there very well. I don't think it works in music. I don't think we want tradition for the sake of tradition. I think we want something that tradition helps us to become, to reach even further, be more evocative, more, more.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. Yeah. You know, and my teacher had a very William Bennett. He has a very flexible mindset. I remember I was going to competitions and also master classes, and I I told him, oh, I really don't like how he's doing this and that, and he said, well, you know, when you play for somebody, they say something you don't like, you just smile and do it, and you don't have to keep it, but take the good things they say. And that
Yeah,
was really, you know, it was so helpful for me to hear that, because when, same thing when you listen to somebody, you know, there are certain things you might disagree with, but you have to admire and accept the great things and learn from that. I think it's very important. So
yeah,
I couldn't agree more with that. Yeah, that's great. Um, so we touched the Met a little bit, right? The subject of Metropolitan Opera with the auditions.
yeah,
They have their specific way of holding the auditions, and this is one thing you and I have in common. Actually, having worked at the Met, and so has most of the wind section in the LA Phil, and in many actually American orchestras, it's kind of unbelievable how many players get jobs in symphony orchestras after a few years of playing at
yeah.
the Metropolitan Opera. But I keep in touch with all the people I worked with at the Met, with the wind players, and the ones who moved away from the Met as well. One thing we all have in common, I think, is the appreciation of what we've learned there. So I wanted to ask you to talk about this. What did the Met and playing in the opera, I mean, in the great opera orchestra, such as Metropolitan Opera is, what did it give you for your,
Hmm.
I mean, for your musical life, of course, for you? What did you learn, and how did it affect your playing later on?
Well, I think we can do a whole conversation about that subject separately because many things. And I will say right now that my heart breaks for what the musicians of the Metropolitan Orchestra are going through right now during this really difficult situation. The situation is hard for all of us, but they're in a particularly hard and unjust situation, and I I feel just such pain for my brothers and sisters in that orchestra, and I really hope that they will come out of this situation as soon as possible because you're right. Whatever I represent as a player, as an instrumentalist, as a musician, absolutely would not be without the Met Orchestra. And I can safely say the same about you, about Steve Williamson, Ricky Morales, Whitney Crockett, and I mean, long list of people, John Ferrillo, and so forth. Because the first thing I learned, I don't know, I'm going to try to keep this short because I have so much to say about the Met Orchestra. I remember the first thing I learned is that I played, my first opera there was Electra by Charles. And I remember, you know, I had played one opera in college. I played the Marriage of Figaro 17 times. So I kind of arrived to the Met thinking, I can do opera. I played Marriage of Figaro 17 times. So, and it was long, you know, 4 hours. So, and Electra, it's like less than 2 hours, like an hour 45. So I remember my eyes were hurting at the end of this opera because there's just so much. It's so intense. It's like everything that like all the drama and symphonic writing and the combination of theater, action, and tone and finesse and power, all condensed into this 1 hour and 40 minutes of music that I absolutely do not know. And of course, you can't adequately prepare for an opera because you can't listen and follow the parts home. And it's absolutely sort of useless because opera is stop and go. It's true collaboration with singers. You have to sometimes you accompany them, other times you co-tell a story with them, other times, especially in Strauss and Wagner writing, the orchestra really shines. So it's not something that I could ever prepare for. And I remember my sort of confidence of knowing how to do opera evaporated within just one opera, like one Electra. By the end of Electra, I kind of arrived to the point where um, I don't know Electra. B, I simply don't yet know how to create this incredible combination of power and finesse throughout the entire time. And of course, I was a little bit younger back then and not quite as experienced with reeds, but you need reeds that can do this for forget 2 hours. That's actually pretty short. For 3 hours and 4 hours, five, six, Siegfried and all this. So I did not know how to do this. And another thing that I learned in about um, probably less than a week is, do you remember how at the end of each opera, how it really felt like family, how supportive everybody was, and how many smiles, how many jokes, how many compliments. And I remember I was, well, just I was a complete disorganized mess because I did not know how to do any of this repertoire, both musically and oboistically. So I look back and Ricardo Morales, former principal clarinet now of the Philadelphia Orchestra, he was still there, and I looked at him and he was laughing and in a good mood, and I just sincerely asked him, Ricky, why are you in such a good mood? And he said to me, well, consider the alternative. It was just it's not seemingly not the most profound thing to say, but absolutely true because the hours are rough. It's by far the most difficult job I've ever had. But having this kind of pride and support and attitude and just positivity about it, that was really unique to the Met Orchestra, and I'm very very grateful to them, just humanly for that. So instrumentally, well, I'm not saying that it's easier to play Bartok or Shostakovich or even Mahler, but there's nothing more difficult than to play Mozart or Verdi. Don't you think? You sort of naked. And
Absolutely.
how I hate these people who you tell them I went to see this movie, it was really good, and then they say, oh, but have you read the book? The book is great. I always found it to be pretentious. So I have to say that for years I heard, oh, Mozart, you need to know his operas. Everything comes from operas. So having played many Mozart operas, I can confidently say that only when I started playing Mozart operas did I actually understand where all of his wind writing, concerto writing, and symphonic writing came from. It came from opera. He's an operatic composer. This theater, this action, this imagination, this humor, this colors. So the way the Met strings, first of all, are able to play Mozart, to have this kind of finesse and beautiful, supple tone, and then sometimes next day, or sometimes if it's Saturday, later that day, play Strauss, play angry, sound with Salome or Frauen und Schatten, or, I mean, that kind of, they say that it's a repertory orchestra, so the turnover is generally speaking less. But when you're trying to produce one kind of style and really do it justice, and then you have to switch gears immediately to something that is just absolutely polar opposite and do that for a number of hours. I mean, that's an incredible amount of flexibility and artistic flexibility and instrumental flexibility. So I think that all of us, I mean, as I said, we can talk about the Met and the things that we learned from the Met forever, but these things I don't know what I would do without them. And of course, I like you, probably missed Brahms. He did not write any operas. We had our individual reasons for wanting to consider other options. But I am absolutely so grateful to the Met Orchestra for the fact that they took a chance on me, and I knew at one point, and they really made sure that I would learn their flexibility. I would learn their sound and the sounds, not just one sound, but sounds. This concept of serving the music, and while being a family, while being a proud, supportive, happy family, that was as difficult as that job was. Um, that was that was very memorable. One final thing I want to say about this is my my trial with Chicago Symphony was Schubert 9, which is a decent piece for a first oboe. And of course, it's a symphony of heavenly length. It's like an hour, especially with Barenboim's tempos and all the repeats. So it was at Carnegie Hall. When Chicago came to New York, I played with them. And so Barenboim, at the end of the rehearsal, approached the wind row and said, "Do you guys want assistance?" The principal wins. "Do you want assistance?" Because it's really long. So the first flute said, "Well, maybe." The first bassoon said, "Yeah." And
My back is hurting. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's really hard. And what about you? I said, "Well, Maestro, I played Meistersinger last night, and I'm playing Parsifal tomorrow. I'm good." So
That's true. I remember this feeling when I just arrived in LA from the Met, and right before I left, I think I did 1 week with 7 shows because my colleague was away. Stefan was going somewhere, and I thought, why not? I'll just do once this, before I leave. And I arrived here, and I had to play only the symphony, 45 minutes of the concert, and it felt like I barely got to warm up after the Met. When you're really, once you sit in the pit, it's like you're going to be there for a while, and it's a different mindset and everything. And here I feel like I'm not working, I'm on vacation or something. But I mean, that changes.
it does change, doesn't it? I remember I asked Ricky Morales when he just joined Philadelphia after the Met. I asked him, "So how do you like your new job?" He said the same thing. He said, "And at 10:15, I'm ready for Act 2. Come on,
Right.
Like, why is everybody leaving? So
Exactly.
it does change because we have jobs of a different nature, but put things in perspective.
Yes.
Well, so I know we talked about international styles and all that, but I want to be a little bit more specific. And I don't know which category this question belongs to, but I want to talk to you about an issue that's been really important to me, particularly because I think that there's just not a consensus on it in wind playing, particularly in flute and oboe, and that issue is vibrato. So, oftentimes, I would listen to an oboist, flutist, and it will be a beginning of a beautiful solo, a beautiful line. I would hear the timbre, the color of the sound, the dynamic, the phrasing as the note would bloom, and I would start enjoying it. This is a beautiful beginning. And then the person would use vibrato. And I'm not talking about any particular person because this happened many times. And sometimes when the usage of vibrato appears, my interest in the rest of the solo, or the person's playing for that matter, disappears. Because I just don't think that we have the same kind of, I don't know what the word is, concept of what vibrato actually is supposed to do in music, and particularly in wind sound. So, what do you think? What is the purpose of vibrato?
Well, that's another subject we can talk about forever. I think vibrato, and it has some differences between the instruments, but I think in general there are a lot of similarities on even strings and wind instruments and voice.
No.
Same things bother me even with the singers with vibrato. So I think in general the purpose of vibrato, of course, is to help the expression. I think to help phrase reach its top, which is this is one thing William Bennett always talks about, and I always talk to colleagues and students. Fundamentally, the most important thing in the phrase is to get it to the top and to use the means necessary. And I think vibrato is one of them. But if you use it constant and the same, it's sort of as you said, you lose interest very quickly. So I think vibrato is a sort of the purpose is to keep the sound alive and also to be expressive. But it's not. It should not be just an automatic thing, always on, and always the same, especially. So I think.
Let me ask you. So let's say you have a student who basically is starting to really find her sound or his sound. The nature of tone production is really starting to happen. And then I find that vibrato is just something, it's such a human reaction. Like whenever we want to be expressive, it just sort of automatically happens. If we want to be very expressive, then it happens very much.
Exactly.
And by very much, I mean vibrato has two main physical components. It has speed and amplitude.
Yes.
So when we get hot and bothered with any particular note or phrase, both really start to happen. So let's say you have a student who gets really excited about, I don't know, deafness. So let's say you arrived on that G sharp. Is that G sharp? Or A flat?
Yes.
How's it written? G sharp.
G sharp,
Yeah.
yes.
So, and the left hand comes out. So all this like incredible amount of passion. And the thing is, you know what I've noticed? Audiences love vibrato. They love vibrato. They love two things. They love vibrato and they love trills. Don't ask me why. We can do a whole new segment on the importance of trills and why people react to it so positively. Like, wow, he's really good. He's using a trill. But so what do you say to a person like this who has a good sound but is using way too much vibrato? Where's the problem? Is it the speed, the altitude, amplitude? Excuse me. Like, how do you fix it? How do you address it?
Well, I think, and this is probably very similar on the oboe. The most important thing about vibrato is that it stays within the core of the sound, within the center of the tone. So it does not go above, no matter what dynamic or.
So I want to be really clear about this. So you said core of the sound, center of the sound. So are you talking about quality? Because core is sort of like a quality thing to me. And talking about music is difficult. Or are you actually talking about the center of pitch, the tone?
No, not the pitch, but I mean the center of the tone, like I don't know how to describe it. If I see it as a sort of round thing, right, with a core inside the tone, and then there's a bit of fluff on the outside, especially on the flute. But when vibrato is too deep, it gets above it affects, I guess, the pitch too much as well. And you hear it with the singers more with the pitch, actually. When they get really old, close to retirement, they would start vibrating so much that you don't always know which note it is. When it's moving fast enough, then it's like, whoa, this thing happens, and you're having difficulty to pinpoint in that where is the note, in the middle.
Yeah. It's very sad when that happens. I mean, I know that we've seen this happen to artists who were wonderful singers at one point, but can't support the weight of the vibrato, and that does not sound good right away.
Of course.
Well,
so I think if vibrato is, it has to get deeper and more shallow. Obviously, it has to be flexible. I think that's one super important thing. It should not be the same and constant. It should be always evolving,
why not?
Changing.
I mean, I agree, but I mean, why not? Why can't it be the same and constant all the time?
Well, because then you sound the same. Also, the interesting thing is, and William Bennett always talked about this too, put more vibrato on the top of the phrase and then less on the release. And when you don't do that, when you play and you vibrate on the last note, which is coming away, even if you diminish it, it sounds way more important than it should be.
No.
Even if you play it very soft, our ear automatically doesn't even acknowledge that it diminished. So I think vibrato's purpose is really to highlight what you're doing musically, to help it. But when it's constant and the same, it's working against you. It actually hides what you're trying to do. You want
Ah,
to go pa, but then vibrato dominates over that, and you don't even hear that thing happening.
well, we
So
as oboe players know about hiding a thing or two because my main problem with this sort of um, incorrect way of using vibrato is, first of all, I agree with your description of it not going outside of the core of the sound and intonation and quality as well. And I absolutely agree with the fact that vibrato emphasizes the top of the phrase, whatever you want it to be, because vibrato brings intensity to the sound. It brings energy to the sound. And just physically, people sometimes in the oboe, as you know very well, we have some notes that are really not so nice. They're bright, or they're unstable, or both.
it's
And when you
exactly the
use a
same
lot of
for a
vibrato
flute.
on these notes, well, you absolutely hide not just the true quality of the note, but you hide the even intonation of the note because then you're just being expressive. And there's something, so the technique of producing vibrato, of course, is I know we try to be like singers. We have a lot of things in common with singers, including vibrato, something that a piano can never do. But the physical way of in producing it, of course, it has to be instrument specific. But there's something that I've observed here in the United States and the oboe. It's what I call the Count Dracula vibrato. And this, I don't know if you saw Count Dracula on PBS. I don't mean like the actual scary monster, but like the cute little monster on I think it's Sesame Street. I think that's the show. Like it's a kids
Uh-huh.
show. So
Yeah.
and he teaches you to count, Count Dracula. So the way he teaches you to count is he's got this horrible Transylvanian accent. He's like good evening, good morning, and then he says one two three So the is how a lot of people produce vibrato on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, which basically is a question of air intensity only, as opposed to if I were to use the other extreme that I also disagree with very strongly, some players in Europe or elsewhere outside of the North American oboe tradition, they use whether it's jaw vibrato or not, but there's so much deviation and variation of amplitude of tone that you can not even see what the tone is. If you happen to be tuning in the middle, if you were to extract this one note, it would not be clear which note it is because it's occupying approximately the sound space of 2.5 tones or something or more.
Mm-hmm.
Way too wobbly, way too wide. And the thing is, it's hard to talk about this because, of course, both of these extremes I think are really unnatural, and I think there's a better way. There's so much more. But when you combine that, either one of these ways, with wonderful tone or phrasing or some other things, of course, we're playing gorgeous music, it sort of works. And that's why I think that it's time for our instruments to really take an issue with what vibrato is, because yes, it brings intensity to the note, to the phrase. Yes, and that's what makes it more expressive. And yes, it should, or I should say, no, it should not be the same all the time. I agree absolutely, because like when I ask students, what does vibrato do? They say, well, it brings color to the phrase, impression, expression, this or that, and it does. But why? This is why it gives it this kind of energy. But the amplitude is really, I don't think we've agreed, because I mean, only bad singers or singers who unfortunately can't support anymore have this kind of like a lawnmower range in the vibrato. Oh, I mean, it becomes too wide and immediately laughable. String players work so hard on it. They work
Mm.
so hard to preserve the integrity of the sound and the integrity of the intonation and the phrasing, but not to go outside of the center of tone, And also string players don't vibrate higher, lower. They fix the tone and they mainly vibrate lower. They generally speaking go lower than above. So it's very hard to talk about it. We're not going to play it today. I'm not using the right microphone. That's my excuse. What's yours? But I think I really, as we're hopefully entering an age of this kind of international scope and international awareness in the development of our instruments, I think we should really look at vibrato as an absolutely great tool of expression, and we can just use it to hide things, hide intonation, hide tone quality, and we can just use the kind of amplitude or intensity that attracts all the attention just to this one note. The comparison that I often make is that's the difference between jewelry and bling. For example, jewelry, embellishments come from imbellire, that's the word imbellimento, to make something more beautiful. You see the person more beautiful, the beautiful chain or jewelry or whatever it is. When you're wearing bling, that's the first thing you see. Whoa, big dollar sign, bling. You know what it is. So I think that is a really big stylistic difference, and I hope people are going to be more mindful of that in the future.
Absolutely. So, speaking of we touched a little bit about the tone, and the core of the tone. This is also a very interesting subject for our instruments, and also related to different schools.
Yeah.
So, what are the qualities you look for in the tone, and what is, because we also had this discussion recently in the group class, what makes a good sound? Because it's, anyway, even within one school, within one teacher, you will still, even if you are really doing religiously everything the teacher wants you to do, everybody will sound, of course, very different, and we have our unique voices, but what are the common things between schools and people's physical, the differences in physics? What, in your opinion, makes a good sound, a good tone?
Well, gee, is that all? In 10 words or less, right? Next question is going to be how to make the perfect reed in 5 words or less.
That's the purpose of life.
And then the easier subjects like world peace and etc. So, well, thank you for this very complex question, which seemingly is obvious because, the wonderful thing about music is that we really have 2 criteria. We like something or we don't like something, right? That's basically
Yes.
like at the end of everything. Like, what do you think of any given piece or player? And then that's basically the only thing that matters. So this is, of course, a huge conversation, and no words can ultimately be adequate because you can't talk about non-tangible things. It's kind of like describe what the color red looks like. I mean, you can sort of do it, but any word you'll use will be description of a description. So I can, however, share some basic concepts that I think good tone on the oboe and the flute, perhaps a certain on clarinet, bassoon. I mean, I will just limit to the winds, but probably beyond need to have, because beautiful tone is, as you said, is never one thing, and of course it most importantly needs to serve the music. It should not take any attention away from the beauty of the music or the character of the music. It needs to serve the character. But the 2 things that it must have is, well, oboists use the word focus and also projection and also color, flexibility, etc., and 10 other words, 20 other words.
The same on the flute, yes.
And also people use the word heft and roundness and fullness and evenness and depth and so forth. And what's important here, as imprecise how some of these words are, all of these words are actually, it's important to realize that this is based on vibration, and this is based on resistance. So instrumentally, when I construct a reed, first of all, starting with the gouge and everything else that I built into that, you don't have that problem. Count your blessings. But then when I make the actual reed and when I play it and choose the instrument, etc., I really try to find a balance between those two things, vibration and resistance. Because vibration and resistance, just physically speaking, they play different roles. Vibration is what carries the sound. For example, if you have somebody with a particularly gnarly oboe sound, they'll have zero trouble projecting. You'll hear them like in a different county because it would just boom. You will just cut through everybody on the stage. You can hear them outside of the symphony hall. So vibration that's what carries. On the other hand, this kind of heft, this kind of resistance, well, when vibration encounters resistance, so it takes care of the partials of these highs or lows of partials. It kind of makes the tone kind of more filtered and purifies it down to something more aesthetically pleasing. That it does that. It does sound more refined or better, but that absolutely does not carry. And I found that when I was really trying to build my tone, I sort of bounced from one extreme to the other. And when I made the extreme to really increase my resistance, to have something really to blow against, first thing that happened, I said to myself, hey, I sound pretty good. I sound better than this. I sound better than I used to. The sound quality is definitely rounder, more beautiful. And then in the orchestra, this is back in my college days, the number one comment that I would get from everyone, every conductor and comment, and just more oboe, more. And I remember thinking, I'm a reasonably healthy guy. I can't physically blow any more in this instrument. I cannot put out any more sound. And don't I sound huge? I mean, it sounds really big. Because I was missing this, what the singers called squillo, actually. That's what a great voice wants to have. So it's a similar combination on the voice, but let's leave the voice aside for now. So people have wonderful tones. People who represent different traditions, different styles have wonderful tones. But they always have a wonderful balance of these two things because you really cannot have one or the other. If you have one, you can, if you only have round and kind of hollow and empty inside, when you play in front of the microphone, it might sound very nice. Well, that's a whole different subject. Maybe we can talk about this next. But it will not carry because it will be empty and sort of kind of blah by the time it gets into the hall because we're all orchestral players. We're all, what we do is not for here. It's for 3,000 people. It's like fireworks. And if you only have players who have this, then, well, it will carry, but it will not be beautiful. So that's my very inadequate, very lengthy answer to your seemingly very simple question. But for sure, both of these qualities are necessary. I think everyone who I've admired, whose tone I liked, speaking about tone only, whose tone I said, man, that's so beautiful, that's so pretty, that really just, I want that. I want to get some of that in my tool belt. I want that in my voice as well. They all had that, and I'm speaking about players not just from the American tradition, people from Europe as well.
I think it really relates to the flute. It's exactly the same. We use different words to describe same things. I think the focus, essentially, it's what makes the tone carry is the harmonics in the sound.
Yeah.
So when the full tone carries more because it has more harmonics. So it's darker color as well on the flute. We use that, so it's more like with more substance. That's the combination of upper harmonics. You add more of them, and you can actually see that if you do spectrum analysis of the tone on the computer. And the empty, beautiful, hollow sound, it's mainly the main note and very few harmonics. Percentage-wise, it's a lot less. So I think that makes a big difference in color and in projection. So you're right, finding the combination not to be too strong, too rough, or not to be too hollow, and it's very, very similar on the flute. I agree, absolutely.
Well, since one of us mentioned recording, um, so that's another topic that maybe the last topic, and I'm not sure if they're going to be questions or not because I'm not really following the feed. Are you following the feed? Are people commenting? Um, they're commenting something, so maybe we'll have the last few minutes for the questions if there are any. If there are any, but I do want to talk to you about recording, not only because it's getting more and more. All of us are doing more and more of it because all of us are interested in knowing more about the technological side of it, but also because we're right now in the middle of this very difficult situation with the COVID pandemic, and we don't see our audiences, we don't even see our friends on the stage, and most orchestras can't even perform on their stages. And recording, other than teaching, which I know you and I have been doing a lot, but recording is one of the ways to feel connected to the musical world and to really feel like we can contribute something to it. So I guess maybe we can. I get asked this question a lot. I'll ask you first, if you don't mind sharing. What recording equipment do you use when you make solo recordings?
Uh, well, I got the equipment fairly recently, and some of it with your recommendations. I had a pair of AKG C451B mics since 2007 or so. I bought them in Japan, and they were just used once or twice, I think, in this whole time. And then I forgot about them for 10 years or so. But recently, because of the pandemic, as you said, we have no opportunities to perform, especially here. It is a little more in Europe, I think. The regulations are a little more relaxed, but in general, we're home most
Not
of
in
the time.
Italy as of yesterday. It's unfortunately it's. I see what you mean. There's more performances in some parts of Europe, but not others. Like Italy is closed again, and everybody's required to wear a mask.
Yes.
€1,000 fine if you don't.
Well, I think it's necessary. I mean,
Absolutely.
not to make this discussion political, which I think it shouldn't be when it's about masks, but
Exactly.
it's a no-brainer to wear one.
Yeah.
But speaking of recordings, yes. So I use those two mics and Focusrite interface. I have 18i8. Both I'm very happy with, and now I have also a pair of Shure SM81s mics as well, and that's the
Copycat.
same. Yes. So I think it makes a huge difference what kind of equipment you use, because you get a completely different sound, and it's essentially, you're trying to get as close as possible to what you really sound like, and it's never going to be quite the same. But interestingly enough, speaking about hiding things, some players manage to sound way better on recordings because of the equipment they use. So you hear, and we've had this in many festivals, when you listen to audition tapes and some player comes and you think, oh my god, wow, this person, it's an amazing player, probably one of the best I've ever heard. And then you get to the festival and it's not exactly the same impression. So, and then we had the opposite. I knew a few people who did not make it to the, for instance, Tchaikovsky competition list past the recording round because of the recording quality. So you because I knew those people personally, and I knew how they sound like in real life, and the recording was nowhere near a fair representation of what they really sound like. So I think there's one thing is recording for yourself, and another thing is also for auditions and things like that. But you have the same goal anyway, to get the best possible sound. And I think what many students don't realize is that they they make their chances much smaller of succeeding to things which are related to recordings, audition tapes for big competitions, for auditions, even for orchestral auditions now. There are pre-screening rounds with recordings. If you record with your phone, don't expect a good result, even if you play amazingly well. Not because you did not play well, but because they could not hear it, because you didn't have good enough equipment for that.
That's excellent advice, and I'm very glad you said that. And maybe we can use this opportunity um, to encourage, especially the students that are watching this, or will be watching this when I will repost this archived on my page. You are represented by the quality of your recording at least as much as by your playing.
Absolutely.
That's what you're talking about. The thing
Yes.
is, uh, it's true that sometimes we judge auditions preliminary rounds are sometimes submitted and recorded in recorded format. Not only that, festivals, competitions we judge, and it's just amazing how little people, and I will just stick with students, know about recording. Seemingly at a time where the equipment that you just described, which is similar to mine, I use condenser SM81 mics with the Focusrite interface, and even though I'm using my USB mic for this interview, where sound sort of doesn't matter, it's similar equipment. I mean, and then we run it for. What you forgot to say is that we process it on Logic.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's other plugins that we use sometimes, but I mean, all of this to have the technology that would be able to capture this recorded sound when this quality, even 10 years ago, would be thousands of dollars. Thousands. I would never dream of being able to do this in my studio at home. So these days, yes, we still use equipment that costs. It is costly, but you can get even GarageBand, which is sort of like poor man's Logic. It comes in built in with every Mac computer for free, and you can get a normal USB mic, and it's like $100 or something, plus or minus, and that's basically all you need to create a recording that will capture in stereo, by the way, you're playing in ways that will be absolutely superior to iPhones or iPads, no matter how convenient it is. And I think it's just too bad that some players really just don't realize this. And I don't know about you, but I think the oboe is just really difficult to record. You probably think the same of flute, right? Because
Yes, I
all
think.
these overtones, and like here we are speaking about tone quality and vibrato and all these wonderful shades and colors, and then you get a recording, sometimes even with an automatic recording level. So, I mean, some people forget to check it off.
Yes.
So it's just too bad, and it's really, I think it's during this time when we don't have any immediate auditions, when we have time to delve into what we actually need to do instrumentally, but also for you students who have the time to invest very little money into a decent microphone. You don't have to get a USB interface and condenser microphones. Get a USB microphone, but it will be completely better than this. And it just, I wanted to say that because you and I are perhaps a little bit more advanced than an average oboe player or flute player about knowing about recording, we've been able to produce some nice recordings together. I will say immodestly. But I'm only saying this because you were on it. My part was bad, but you were wonderful. And even when you were in Korea, we did recordings because
Yes.
that's one of the really strange advantages of this unfortunate, weird situation is that technology makes us all sort of and experiment with the same things, and we don't have to wait to do this. So I'm very impressed by not just the playing. This is really obvious with a player like you, but with the quality with which your playing is produced and it's recording on your social media. So I think it should serve a really good example to people, because it's absolutely valuable to know, not just because of this pandemic, but in general. I mean, we are recording artists as well.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree.
Well,
Couldn't agree more.
how are we doing on our stream? Let's take a look. If anybody wants us to talk about something that we haven't talked about. Oh, so nice. Pete Bond, happy birthday yesterday.
Oh, happy birthday,
Oh,
Pete.
that's nice. So, no questions yet. So, did we miss anything?
Well, I think we talked about those few things we wanted to talk about. The ones
Yeah.
we sort of bring up every time we have a glass of wine together.
I want to commend you on your valiant effort to agree to have this conversation virtually, unlike certain presidents of certain countries. Um, and I'm very glad that we're able to have this chat. I just wish it was in person. People have been, so tell me, people have been doing these wine dates, like wine Zoom dates. Do you do this? Like so you essentially you drink wine on Zoom, right?
Yeah, it works very well when it's only two parties, I think. We've done that
How do you
with
toast?
friends.
You go like this
Yeah,
with a, really?
sure. It's pretty good, but it doesn't work so well when you have 10 people or so, because then they start talking at the same time, or you're never talking, or
I don't have that many
so.
friends in my life, so I don't have that problem. Um,
Well,
uh,
parents' gatherings at school and things like that. It can be a little harder.
maybe you and I can try wine date in the foreseeable future, since
that would
you
be
can't
nice.
go to Napa just yet.
Well, hopefully soon.
Hopefully soon. But listen, I want to thank you for this hour, so we can chat like this face to face about some really really important issues. And thank everyone who joined to watch this conversation. We will. I have no objection to posting it permanently. How about you, Denis?
Of course.
We didn't say anything inappropriate, did we?
Hopefully not, and I hope
We did not insult too many people, right?
hopefully the streaming started when we thought it did, not earlier.
Okay, good.
Thank
So
you so
listen.
much, Eugene, for organizing this and for having me in your chat room here. It was really.
You can thank me by organizing a Zoom wine date. I will look forward to that with you.
Eugene, I think I just see a question here. Can you talk about the process of achieving a good blend between principal oboe and principal flute in the orchestra? Whether it's someone you're playing next to for years, or in a situation such as a school orchestra or festivals when musicians are seated next to different players who may have. Oh, it just disappeared.
I see this question. So talk about, very briefly, I see some questions just showed up. Sorry, I didn't see them earlier. Very briefly, so talking about the process of achieving a good blend between principal oboe and principal flute in the orchestra. Well, the thing is, it's a really, really personal relationship, because we really do see each other. We coexist. This kind of flobo relationship is probably the most important relationship in terms of just sheer amount of time spent together on the stage making music. So I've said to a number of flutists, some were wonderful, some were really wonderful, some were wonderful to get along with, some were not. And I think it's always any kind of a communal effort takes two people. And there's nothing I can do personally if the principal flutist does not want the same kind of balance with me. Because the writing, and I say this to my student all the time, I love to play the oboe solos. I love it. It's fantastic. It's so flattering. It's magical and fabulous. That, I think, probably constitutes maybe 1 or 2% of what I actually do. The rest of the time, I'm an ensemble player, which makes me absolutely no different from any other person on the stage, including principal flute. So, with a person like Denis, for example, can I talk about you? You don't have to listen, because I'm going to say good things. So, whenever I play with Denis, and this quality is not unique to you, other people also possess that kind of quality, is that people want to work together, and people are very, like you, are very aware of where the flute has the really prominent line, when the flute does not have the prominent line. When we're going for the flobo sound, or klobo with a clarinet, or bobo with a bassoon, or something like this. I don't know. Or when the winds are supporting, when the winds are leading, etc. So you always have to listen because this combination of playing but also listening is what really avoids a lot of problems. And yes, it helps to know just through time and experience that you learn a little bit about the instrument, the difficult things that, and I mean, honestly, if a colleague asks you something, hey, can you do and insert any request here, unless it's completely absurd, give this person a chance. Just do it. Don't bring your whole person to it. Oh, but I don't have the right reed, or I don't have the right head joint, or whatever my oboe is. I mean, just try to make the effort because in the end, in the beginning, during, and in the end, any problem is solvable between two people with personal skills. Give this person a chance. But also because instrumentally, I've loved most of the flutists that I've sat next to. I've admired them for their artistic flexibility, for their sounds, for their technique, their personality, and I envy flute for this wonderful, round, beautiful, dark quality that they can have in the sound, much like I envy the clarinet for the beautiful range and the pianissimo and the power. So I've tried to expand my sound beyond, again, whatever I think is good tone, but to have more of these qualities for the same reason, so that it would be easier to blend with me.
Yes.
And you tell me, Denis, if I succeeded or not, but
Of course.
it's a work in progress. It's always a work in progress.
Yes, I think it's very easy to blend with you, and we've played together quite a few times in festivals.
Yeah.
And I think it's how much, from pure physical point, like how much you leave room in your tone for other players. So you have to make it not too only projecting, like we were talking earlier about the tone, but leave enough space around it where other instruments can join you and you find something in common. With harmonics, this is a long conversation too, but when the harmonics are in tune in both players, it's very easy to know pitch-wise when it comes to, because pitch is part of blend, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when you play together with a player who has harmonics in tune, like yourself, I know exactly, even if we're not right away to 1 hertz on the same pitch, but I know which way to go immediately. Because you hear it, okay, I'm a little bit higher, I'll come down, But when the tone itself is out of tune, I've played with a few players where I just could not find, no matter how far up or down I went. And it can be very difficult. So I think big part of blending is also for each player to have good basics, to have the tone in tune. And again, as I said, it's a long conversation. I love talking.
I want to contribute one thing to that, to blending in general, of playing in tune with other people. So intonation is not an absolute.
Yes.
It's just something I've gotten into so many fights with piano tuners who have their own theories on how to tune a piano, and you may want to tune it one way for Rachmaninoff piano concerto, which plays with a large orchestra, or how you tune it for Mozart piano concerto number 21, who plays with a very small ensemble of winds that basically plays and interacts melodies in a particular register. But that's between me and piano tuners. But when it comes to playing in tune with your colleagues, especially front row or back row colleagues in the winds.
Yeah.
So the worst thing you can do, the absolute worst thing, is you can say, "Excuse me, I'm plugged in. My bell is right here. Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm like right with this thing. I'm playing totally in tune. It's at 0 all the time. Okay, so you fix your thing." And
I actually had a colleague do that to me once.
Oh, me too. Take a number. Many people. I mean, the idea is, so like if we were computers, right? If you and I were not living being artists, but if we were computers, you shall play at 0, and he shall play at 0, and then we will be zeros. Well, I guess I can argue with that. I think it will be zeros then. But intonation where, who you're playing with, which octave, because, and also which dynamic and which part of the phrase. So, I mean, tuning, absolutely. Trust me, I'm an oboist. I begin every morning with a tuner, and I have perfect pitch. I know where a 440, 441 is. I don't need the tuner. It's not for me, it's for them. Are you using a tuner? Yes, I am. Not for me, but for you. So we have a starting place. We started at a certain point, and I see value in this. But once we've started, we're making this live, beautiful, living, breathing thing called music. So blending is listening. And yes, there are times when somebody actually is in disagreement with you. Somebody's either sharp or flat, or the worst case is flarp. When somebody's flarp, that's actually difficult to fix. Again, all you can hope to do, I mean, it's for you to fix it. Don't expect that they will fix it or the entire cello will fix it. Cello section will fix your problem. You try to find it, and if you can't, and only then you say, can we try and nicely? Can we try this note? Maybe you can come down a little bit. Maybe you can raise it. Can we try it? And you don't do it during the performance, of course. You do it during the break, maybe in private. And it seems kind of obvious, but this solves a lot of problems, and more important, avoids some other ones. So maybe time for one last question, if there aren't any. Any questions? Very valuable advice about recording. Good. Happy. Late to the party. Will this be available for viewing later? Yes, absolutely. So I think it's a good place for us to start. I'm kind of getting excited about our upcoming Zoom wine days.
Let's fix a date soon.
Let's pick a date soon. Thanks for
Thank
everybody
you.
who joined. Stay healthy, wear a mask, make lots of recordings, and we'll do more of these chats. Okay?
Thank you, Jim. Nice
Take care,
talking to you.
everyone. Thank you, Denis.
Bye.
Ciao.